Welcome to This Humean Life with the Philosophical Coach. I'm thrilled to have you tuning in. I'm your host, Sam Kukathis, aka the Philosophical Coach, philosopher, Hume expert, and high performance coach. This podcast is designed for you to go from being the passenger in your life to the owner of your life. It is designed for you to go beyond who you know yourself to be, really. If that intrigues or excites you, then you are definitely in the right place. The ideas are drawn from neuroscience, philosophy, my coaching practice, working with elite leaders, and experience. You can expect candor, humor, vulnerability, and ideas which are unfamiliar to you, and some you may just plain disagree with. You'll also get the opportunity to hear from inspiring coaches and leaders. Now let's get ready to question what we know and go beyond our limitations. Welcome back to This Humean Life. Today we're exploring this question. How do you reignite the spark to alter the trajectory of your life? And to really examine this, I have my guest, Jeff Lee. Who's Jeff? Jeff's had a career at the highest levels of public policy and politics, at the state, federal, and international levels. He's a recognized thought leader in political advocacy and representation. His analysis and opinions have been featured on MSNBC, broadcast television in 40 states, as well as in print at such publications as Politico Magazine, The New York Times, USA Today, The Washington Post, and Forbes. And during the height of the Asian hate movement, he penned an opinion piece that received national attention in Politico Magazine called, "I Thought I Knew How to Succeed as an Asian in US Politics. Boy, was I wrong." And that highlighted his experience in workplace discrimination in politics and racism throughout his life. And what you may not already know about Jeff is that he's completed 4 100-mile running races, also known as the Ultra Marathon, qualified for the Boston Marathon by running 3 hours and 10 minutes only 15 months after being at 300 pounds. So, Jeff, before we get into this question of how you can reignite the spark to alter the trajectory of your life, first of all, thank you so much for being here. And would you mind just sharing a little bit about yourself so people can hear in your own words?
Hey, thanks for having me, Sam. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm looking forward to our conversation today. About me, I think, in speaking about my life, I have to tell you about my parents who were Vietnamese refugees after the fall of Saigon. They left on a 32-foot raft, got picked up by the Thai Navy, and were in refugee camps in Thailand and the Philippines for 6 years before making it to the United States and landing in California in 1981. I was born a year after. So I'm an American. I sound like an American. But in some corners of the world these days, people don't think I am an American, which I think is an interesting question. But my life growing up in Southern California, allowed me to, number one, have an appreciation for the sunshine. And number two, a feeling of optimism, which I think a lot of Americans have, but Californians in particular have. And then three, a desire to really explore the world. California has 40 million people, 5th largest economy in the world. So that's a larger economy than most European Union members, including France and the United Kingdom, for example. So it's a place of monumental scale. When you think of Napa Valley, when you think of Silicon Valley, when you think of Hollywood, but also the large agriculture community, the large manufacturing sector, the military communities there. And those are all built on the foundation of peoples from all around the world that are there. And so it was really an amazing experience to grow up there, and that's helped forge my worldview and my adventures in travel. So I'm looking forward to speaking with you about my passions, both in public policy, the advocacy space, and as well as the opportunity to talk to you about, personal feats. And I think things we can learn from that together.
Amazing. Yeah, that's one, it's incredible, the experience that your parents went through. Obviously, there are so many people where that story would still is pertinent and relevant right now. But can you share a little bit about how that your parents' experience shaped who you are now?
Oh, you have to understand, my parents are chicken farmers in Southern Georgia, right? That's probably not the typical story that you hear from people that work in the tech sector or have worked for governors or have had the chance to travel around the world. My parents are salt of the earth people. They didn't have the same opportunities that maybe you and I had. But they really taught me 2 things that I think are really important to note. The first is that you need to have a short memory. Amnesia is very important when you're dealing with challenging things. That allows you to sort of overcome, as long as you can learn the lesson that matters. And certainly when you're working in manual labor, and coming from an experience of trauma, generational conflict, that's important. The second is to not forget who you are. And I think that's really important, that just because you have certain achievements or experiences, that doesn't define you. What does define you is your character, the people that you spend your quality time with in your life, how you invest in others around you. That is actually way more important than shiny titles or, flashy business cards or whatever, people tend to gravitate that towards. So that experience has kept me on the ground, which I think is really important, especially when you're engaging with the public or trying to work on areas of innovation and frankly, disruption in the 21st century. You need to come from a place of being centered, being anchored, and frankly, from a place of empathy.
Yeah, I think that's what we're seeing more and more right now, is this shift towards empathy as not just like a soft skill, but almost a necessity to be able to create, relationships that work professionally, personally. Like there's such an emphasis on that, which is really, inside of that spirit of optimism that you started off sharing about at the beginning.
Yeah, and I think it's funny because my parents are superstitious. So it's weird when you come from an Eastern culture but live in a Western context. Yeah. There's sometimes a clash of things culturally, right? And my parents do have this, these things that they'll raise, and I'll say, "What are you talking about? That doesn't come from anything." And you have to remind yourself that it comes from maybe their lived experiences. Again, I don't know what it's like to have fled everything I knew to a place where I knew nothing and, had to start from zero. Like, I don't know what that is, right? I was born, I guess, in the English contest, right? I was born in some ways with already a goal in the net, right? Versus them that, they're born not even in the stadium. So there is that mindset and sort of understanding that there are so many factors that are already out of your control, even before you're here. And I think that sort of big picture, I think, allows us to sort of recognize that hard work and grit and savvy are important, but also, let's be real, that luck is a big part of that too, in terms of your personal or professional successes too.
Yeah, like I was interested there when you said like around control, because I think it's a very seductive idea in the way in which we all live, where we seek to be in control. Like as a human being, we seek certainty, and yet it's one of the things that we can never have. Like even when we think we're certain, there's still something which could create room for doubt. Like obviously the conversation here has been around like the question of who are you really, without ever seeking certainty about that. But when it comes to control, it goes even deeper. Like we can't control the where we're born or the circumstances around that or anything like that. But it's, you can't even control the thoughts that you're having right now as I'm speaking. You can't control the feelings which just are automatically there. You can't control the physical sensations which are there. You can't control the mental state which is present moment to moment. And yet, because we think we should be able to, we then beat ourselves up as human beings because we should be able to do all this. It's like we should be able to redefine what it is to be human, and go beyond the mechanism that is like the way the brain functions.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough. We're all still made of carbon and water, right? We still have these factors that keep us mortal, right? You only live once unless you're, as my mother would say, Buddhist or Hindu. So there are constraints on the life canvas. But I think to your point, and I think it's related, the famous philosopher Mike Tyson once said, everyone has a plan until you get punched in the mouth. And I think that's true. Like you can come in with like a landscape of what you think it's going to be like, and things come up all the time. And that's good. The question of life, I think, isn't about whether you get punched in the mouth or not. It's about whether you get punched in the mouth and you get up, and what are you going to do with that? What did you learn from that? How are you going to use that? How do you channel that? That's actually the way more interesting thing, because I can guarantee you, even the most successful, privileged, accomplished people have had a punch in the mouth in some point, figuratively, maybe literally. And, I think that sense of resilience, the sense of learning from failure, the ability to have had a plan B in a world where there's infinite plans, I think is actually one of the biggest challenges that people face, is especially if you're a person that has had access, a person who's had multiple abilities. What do you do with it? How do you focus yourself into something when you are capable of many other things, thereby having to create limits based on the decisions you make? And as humans, we're always wanting to have our cake and eat it too, right? Can't we peer into multiple universes to see how the outcomes come? When you land off the airport, right, in the airplane, and when you're going through customs and you're going through security, there's a part of you that always feels like, oh my gosh, did I forget something? Do I need to go back and get something? But by the time you get out that door, you can't. Yep. There are a lot of life moments like that. I think, in the States, we would say, life is a series of revolving doors, and then there's one-way doors. And it's really about figuring out how to enjoy all the revolving doors and bracing yourself for the one-way doors.
Well, yeah, I think one of the simplest ways is to choose them. So if they occur as a one-way door, how do you create it so it's not a constraint for you?
Yeah.
Well, you choose that door because you choose the door. When you create a reason or a justification or an explanation for it, it actually kills any power around a choice. It becomes a decision. And then that's when you get to like the cost of benefit analysis approach to life, where you're constantly weighing things up and then going, but what if I did it this way?
Mm-hmm.
And then that's where regret lies, because you could have, if I did this, then maybe this would have happened. And then you like the sliding doors moment of life.
Totally. Yeah. I think it's also the case of analysis paralysis. I think there are people that I think it's, if you go to a restaurant and you've got too many things on the menu, there are some people that, visibly and understandably get pretty exercised over that. There's a part of me that wants just two things on the menu and you pick one, right? There's a clarity. It's straightforward, 50-50 versus 100 options, right? 1% chance to get it right versus 50-50 to get it right. So I sympathize with that. But also, to your point, there should be relief when you make decisions. You've eliminated all the other things that were hanging over your head, right? That's how I would feel about that. But I think, to your point, you get to the ledge, you have to make the commitment. And that part, that part's the scary part. I'll tell you, in my 20s, one of the things I always wanted to do was go skydiving. And I was able to convince 3 other friends to do it with me. The hardest part for skydiving, and I don't know if you've had the chance to do it, the hardest part, highly recommend, because it sounds stupid. It is stupid. But they make you go through all of this. You go through this like video, and then you sign all these horrible waivers about your life basically not mattering. But then you meet your instructor, they tie you together, you go on the plane. The scariest part is when you hear the door open. That's the scariest part. Actually jumping out isn't so scary. It's like the anticipation. That part is way scarier. And then guess what? You jump out of it, and it's just this like, you made the decision and you're just taking in the decision. You're seeing the sky, you see the free fall. And then before you know it, you're on the ground. And I don't regret it. It's one of the best things I've ever done. But but that part is scary. And actually, the group before us and the group after us, each of those groups had one person that not do it. When they heard the door open, didn't do it. And I wonder, like, what makes that someone decide not to do it in that situation, right? And I think that's being relevant to the conversation we have today about like what's the tipping point to make you do the thing that you don't really want to do, but you need to do. What is that? What inspires that? What holds us back? And what allows us to be better at that decision point?
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes down to what's the context in which you're creating that circumstance. Because, if we see something from a particular point of view, then that shapes the actions that we're likely to take. So if we are, if you're in a plane and you're about to jump out of it, it's really obviously very understandable that someone's fears are going to be very present to them, and the anticipation of what could go wrong is going to be fundamental. So I could imagine that something which might shape someone's experience there is having someone say, like, everyone experiences this and this anticipatory fear once before they go out. But once they do, my experience is that people are like, how can I go? Can I go? When can I go again? And like something which just jumps them out of the space which they're in, where they're taking their thoughts so seriously, because it's the seriousness that we give what we're going through in a moment, which then creates the reality around it. If we just like, oh, there's that thought. Oh yeah, I have fear. Okay, I'm a human being. I have fear. Like that's just there. I'm present to that. Now work through the fear by just being present to it rather than trying to do something with it.
Yeah, I think it's true. I mean, it's how do you channel that moment? And I think, I'm sure when you look back on your life, there were probably pretty important decisions that you got to. And there were probably degrees of fear with it, right? Because as humans, we, whether we like it or not, right, we put a higher weight on status quo or what we know. We're more scared of the unknown. But the amazing part about human beings is that we also adjust the status quo quicker. So once you make that decision, we actually can revert to a place of the new status quo, and we adjust that. That's actually one of the unique superpowers I think humans have, is the ability to be able to take stock of their new moment and then make an assessment on their new circumstance. And that's probably part of the survival of our people, right?
Yeah.
That's one of our skills, right? Now, obviously the pros and cons with that is we also have free will and consciousness. And those two things, those two things have, again, to the point we talked about, a lot of revolving doors. And that can be a little overwhelming. But once that decision comes, you should be able to move forward, especially if it's from a point that you are faced with an existential question, right? And whether that's your health is failing and you need to do something about it drastically, whether that's trying to figure out how to give back to your country, or whether it's to support communities of people that don't have a voice, like whatever that is, it has to be a genuine spark of inspiration, but it also has to be masked with the feeling of, I must do this because there's no other path I see. So once the revolving doors all start turning into just one-way door, I think that's your moment. And I think when you look back on your life, I think some of the greatest decisions, the greatest things that came from those decisions come from that opening of the airplane door, seeing the ledge and sort of taking the leap.
Yeah. And that it's almost unfathomable, at least to me, to imagine that not being a scary moment unless you've done it multiple times before and you have the experience, because your brain's like, what are you making me do? Like, I don't understand, this is gonna, if fear is not there, it's kind of like, okay, then you must just be an expert at this kind of thing. Or there is a book around very unique brains where there's like one person who never experienced fear in their entire life. And so people they never experienced fear. So they would do studies to see like what they could try and scare them. But that was just the way their brain operated. So it is possible, but it's it's not the norm.
No, far from it. Far from it. I think, I think there's an argument to be said that sometimes ignorance is bliss. Sometimes it's better not to know. I think of professional athletes when you see a young person in a very intense situation and somehow they handle it so easily. And part of it, I would argue, is maybe they haven't really internalized it in the way that you would think, versus someone who's been more battle tested, who knows the stakes, right? The other argument that you see is, the youngster, the pressure is too much, right? Because they haven't experienced it before. I don't know what that break point is between embracing the unknown and not taking it as a life or death thing versus the person that feels just the weight of it just collapsing on them because they realize just how important it is. I'm not sure how that breaks from a psychology perspective, but I'm sure you've seen many people in your field or other parts of your life where there's a carefreeness that everybody's secretly wanting to have, but also bitter about, right? In that moment.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I could, when you say carefreeness, the first thing which comes to mind is like being in high school and seeing someone like almost seeming like they wing a English presentation.
Yeah. Oh,
and you
yes.
like know that you busted your ass to produce something, and it wasn't as good. So like that's the kind of carefreeness which I can remember.
No, it's 100%. I think I think public speaking is a great one. I think in the US, I think public speaking ranks like number 2 or 3 for like worst things to do. I think it's like moving. I think it's like setting yourself on fire. It's like these things, like those things, like people have a very visceral, like there are some people, if you survey, I think they view public speaking as worse than some of those things, which I'll just tell you, moving is easily the worst thing. But I sympathize with the fear of being judged by peers. I would argue being judged by strangers, who cares? But I would think, I don't know how it was for you, but, when I started in public service, if I had a big speech, I had friends do the vetting because I found what my friends thought of what I was saying actually more powerful to me and actually more scary than a group of strangers. So everyone has sort of the lever context of like what we weigh more and how we adjust accordingly.
Yeah, like I think there are certain voices in your life where what they think matters because potentially like they have some expertise in that area. So if they can see like, oh, this makes a difference, or what you're saying is really good. Like certainly as with my background as an academic, when I, was waiting 5 months for my supervisor to send me comments on my PhD, and in my father being an academic, he just sent me a quick text to say, oh, I just read through the thesis and, it's a really impressive piece of work. I'm really proud of you. And it's got a clarity which you'd hope for in any piece of writing. And I was just like moved, and, that was a kind of comment and validation, if you like, that I've been waiting for 10 years. So it was really like, whoa, okay, like I've written this on my own, and yet this is the feedback I'm getting. Now, still have to wait to see what the other people who have something to say about that would say. But just because that person, in my case, my father, has had such an important influence on me and shaped so much of my life, having his like, this is good, is like, here's a gold medal. Like, it's got that kind of weightiness to it. So,
well, it's not just the weightiness; it's the validation.
Yeah,
right? And validation means a lot of things from a lot of people. But from a stakeholder perspective in your life, I think for most people, the family stakeholder is a unique one, like it or not. Right? It's you can't. There's a family you choose and the family you're born with, and that's a constituency that is a little out of your control. And I would argue, especially if you're in, from a community of color, for example, or from a group that, hasn't had the same access to opportunities, there's always going to be a translation cost. And I know, at least for my parents, right? My parents are, chicken farmers in Georgia. Trying to explain to them my day job. Their neighbors said it best to me. They said, "Oh, yeah, you're Lee's son. You're the one with the shiny office jobs." That's how they describe my work to their peers, right? Who are in rural agriculture, manual labor work, because the world, it could be like Mars. You could just be describing Mars. I'm sure academia has a degree of Mars to it. If you were to try to explain your research or your day-to-day life to somebody not experiencing that at all. And frankly, let's say peer groups of theirs not experiencing it all. So we're talking multiple rings out, right? So it's more like Earth and, Neptune than Earth and Mars, right? If you think of it that way.
100%. Like there are so many different areas of life where that would apply, not just in the kind of the workforce, I think. And I kind of want to shift the conversation and bring it to this overall question around the spark, right? So like when you hear this question, what's the spark to get you to alter the trajectory of your life? What is both present to you and what do you see was kind of like an important moment for you, which started to kickstart altering the trajectory?
So, I mean, I feel very both blessed and cursed. Blessed in that I have felt like I've had the support, the opportunity, the investments from others to allow me to be in a position to succeed. But the curse is having to go through these existential moments more often than I prefer in the 38 years of my life. For me, so there are three sort of pillars in my life that I had these deciding moments, right? These big sort of turnaround junctures. Three areas. One, in my fitness life. I was almost 300 pounds. I could barely walk upstairs. The doctors were like, hey, 40 doesn't look so good if you keep this up. And I had lived this life of trying to live for the moment, and I sort of took that as license for not take care of yourself, and I tried to invest so much more in others around me rather than facing the real fear I had, which was investing in myself. In that situation, it's an existential no choice moment, which was, if I do not turn anything around, I will not be here for 40. I'm 38 today, right? So I'm very thankful for that soon. The second place would be in, public service work. When I went to work for the governor of California, my home state, I had been working in international development for a number of years. And I really struggled with the question of how I loved the work I was doing overseas, and included stints in Afghanistan, for example. I love the work I was doing, but how was I giving back to the place I was born in? And I really struggled with that. And there was this sort of moment of, if I do not go back, I will never go back. And that was something I just could not accept. It was part of who I am. It's not just existential, but also a feeling of losing your connection to your community. That was really powerful. And then the third chapter, which we'll talk about today, was in the advocacy space, which I'll tell you, I spent my entire life running away from the media, from not wanting to talk about my heritage. I was just trying to fit in, Sam. I didn't want to be the kid that had the weird lunches at school. I never felt, I was always trying to be something to make it easier for me.
Yeah.
And in the last year, when, you saw sort of record acts of violence or active hate against Asian communities, I just couldn't say anything anymore. It was, this past March, there was a shooting. There were shootings at these Asian-owned businesses, these spas in the Atlanta area.
Yeah.
And, a gunman had killed women of Asian descent. One of those spas is 15 minutes from my sister's house. And I just couldn't get over that picture that it could have been someone in my family or someone that I connected with. But sort of the spark that we talked about here was when that shooting happened, I got hundreds of messages from friends, partly because they knew I had family in Atlanta, partly because it was something I was speaking about more. But that turning point for me was seeing my community of friends of all stripes and sorts, including the most disconnected or the most disengaged to their heritage. So I would say the apathetic Asians is the way I would phrase it, who they cared about three things. They'll joke, but it's true. It was the mortgage, their kids' high school or university prospects, and the promotion on the ladder in their day job. And these were the same people asking me, hey, where can I donate money? Where can I give my give my time? I can't have this happen. And when all of those folks in the world said, hey, I need to do something, that was a really important moment for me to sort of make the push into doing it too, right? At least at the level that I had to jump out of the plane.
Yeah.
right? I couldn't just sort of say I was going to do it, right? I couldn't just research skydiving, right? You just do it. And that's what sparked a number of the writings in it. So in those three circumstances, the running, the public service, professional moments, and the advocacy for Asian communities, those all required sort of these really personal, direct opportunities to realize that if you didn't do anything, could you look yourself in the mirror? And I just each time sort of landed in the same place, which is I need to do this because it's not just about me. There's many other variables, many other people that could be impacted by this decision. And the blessing I've had is an amazing community of people that will actively support those choices. And so that's, I think, led me to where we are, where you and I are talking today. But so those were sort of successful moments. I mean, I look forward to also talking about failure, because for every success, there's about 10 other failures. And there were a lot of failures and iterations along the way to be in a place of being more durable, more resilient, and frankly, more sustainable. And that's the struggle I have now. And we can talk about that after we go through the different permutations. But how do you fit all of this in your day life without having to completely uproot the apple cart, where you can see your friend for lunch, where you can work your day job, where you can spend your time with your family and still do things that are important to you and still have it woven in a way where it doesn't disrupt your day-to-day life? That's a really hard issue now that I'm facing. And I'm sure many of the listeners here are thinking about, like, how do you get your passion to fit into all the other stuff?
Yeah.
I think that's the big one. Without burnout and without resentment. And it's resentment for yourself, but also resentment that others might have for you. That's the key.
Yeah, that's a great kind of area to look at. And yeah, we'll definitely come back to that. But I want to start with the advocacy, because I think it's probably the one which I saw you be the most emotive about. And there seems like, what you beautifully put was this thread where you saw an opportunity, and the opportunity was generated from there being something more important than yourself, which was at play. So it sounded like when it comes to like your weight, it was like, well, if I'm not around till 40, then, who suffers? Like all my family, all, potential, my kids, if you have kids at that time, I don't know if you did, all the friends I have, everything which matters to me. It was really easy, I think, to be in a space of like not being kind to ourselves as human beings. Like we're the most self-critical of ourselves, no matter what. I think it's, that's just kind of what it is to be a human being. Some people put a facade, I guess, of like, no, I'm more scared of other people's judgment. And they think that's what they're scared of, but they're still just judging themselves, judging where that kind of reflection is coming back at them. Right. And then this, I think that's such a powerful way of looking at how you can alter the trajectory of your life in any area. That if you can shift from this place of it being about you to going to you really see like, hey, hang on a second, like there's something bigger at stake, right? So I'm curious about what is it about you which has allowed you to have this superpower? Because I'm going to say it's a superpower to be able to get out of your own way, which we all can get into, the resistance of being a human being, resistance of the resignation about a situation, to being like, I'm going to step into a bigger game because there's something bigger at stake.
Yeah. So I think one part is it's circumstance. I was a late bloomer in my life. In the United States, people are identified for exceptional talent pretty early. That's part of our university recruitment, right? Whether that's for a sport or for intellectual pursuits or an uncanny ability. They try to identify that stuff pretty early. I was not on that track, far from it. I went to I went to a public university I enjoyed and, was able to get a graduate degree later, but I didn't have the pressure. Sam. Like I wasn't born in this world of you will do this and you'll do that. The only pressure I faced was that my parents regularly reminded me that they didn't come across the ocean on a boat so that I could blow it. That was, when you talk about family pressure, that was it. And it was very honest, right? They, you think, I mean, even now, the context of their sacrifice is still something I'm still processing. And only now, and this is probably pretty typical of, more East Asian cultures, but, they've only started revealing stories from that journey. And they're all pretty horrible, as you can imagine, all pretty horrible. And so understanding the weight of the sacrifice to allow you to have the freedom to choose whatever you want, anything you want, any destiny you have, that's something that I realized early on. But it was never in the sense of achieving big things. It was never in that. And frankly, I didn't have teachers or tutors or coaches or mentors for that matter who were like, oh, Jeff's going to do great things. That was never, I don't think that was the case. It wasn't until I was 32 really that I started being identified for leadership fellowships and opportunities. And in terms of sort of the turnaround in my life, like we were talking about, I mean, I, was almost 300 pounds at 24 and a half. Right. So that's pretty early. And nobody expected, I mean, even my closest friends will tell you, like, they did not expect me to make such a bold choice to clear the decks and really commit. So I don't think it's a superpower as much as not being burdened by expectations. I don't think I had much on me externally. Internally, I think I did, but I would have probably described the first 24 years of my life as one that made decisions on the whim, wasn't very strategic. I wanted to experience a lot of things, right? So whether that was going to every Major League Baseball stadium or traveling to different countries, I just wanted to see as much as I could. That was the privilege of the citizenship I hold, right? It was able to travel fairly freely in the world. But it was never the case of like, oh, you're on this path of greatness. Far from, right? I think if my teachers lined me up or coaches lined me up with anybody, they probably wouldn't have picked me in the upper half, right, by any stretch. So the reason why I mentioned this, Sam, is that I do have friends who have been on the greatness track for a very long time, and the pressure they feel is way worse than anything I ever feel. Because the pressure is cumulative, right? It's like a big crescendo at the end of the song. It's and it can weigh you down. And to your point, like, your biggest critic is yourself. So you can imagine what kind of self-loathing there must be there. I was unencumbered from that. So, I felt like I had the freshness to sort of say, I need to. Also, I think also just really important, for the part of this discussion, like, I had for the most part a pretty easy, I'm going to say easier life. And so I really thought to myself, like, this is the challenge. The biggest challenge is the one inside, right? And I said, if I ever wanted to do something meaningful, I needed to take care of my stuff first, right? If I wanted to be a good friend, if I wanted to be a good family member, if I wanted to be a good coworker, I needed to resolve these shortcomings because I wasn't making the mark, right? So I think that was a sense of both grit and, frankly, we talked about ignorance. It was like grit and ignorance. Let's be real. And I think that helped lead me there. I will say there are 3 buckets within what we're talking about to sort of, when you make that decision, how do you make sure that you can succeed, right? Because it's one thing to make a decision, but you need to commit, and then you need to own the outcomes. And really, I think there's 3 things, right? First, you have to have the opportunity to be able to do the thing you want to do, which means you need to be able to accumulate or develop or gather the resources to do it. So when I was doing my running, like, I had to find people to talk to about the issue. I needed to get the equipment. I had never owned running shoes before, right? I needed to find a training program. I needed to research on fitness and nutrition and about, burnout and those things, right? You had to build that. In the political the public policy, public service space, you need to have the opportunity to interview. And that whole world of how do you engage into the class of political elites, that's its own roadmap. You need to find your way. And that's usually by relationships, unique skill set, or just luck. And the third, in the advocacy space, you need, for me to write the things I was writing, like, yes, you need to be able to write with passion and fervor and reason and facts, but you also need an editor to take a chance on you. And before I got into Politico, or it's in the New York Times or Washington Post, the first piece I wrote was a small one in the Albany Herald, which had a readership of 30,000 in my parents' hometown. You need to start somewhere, and then you need to build the momentum. You need to take small steps forward if you're thinking the long game. And that's how I was approaching it. That was really important on the opportunity scale, right? The second thing is you need to have a community in your corner. How do you build that? How do you foster that? And then how do you enable them to do the things that you need them to do without holding you back, but giving you honest feedback so that you're grounded? That I think is the hardest challenge, right? It takes a village. The analogy I give is, if you ever watch race cars, Formula One or this sort of thing, yeah, there's a driver, and yeah, there's a really fancy car, but there's a pit crew of engineers and people fine-tuning things and giving feedback or giving strategic advice in the pit so that you are in a position to succeed. And yeah, it's your race, but there's all these people that are also in your race too. And you're foolish to not take that on. And I've seen a lot of, mainly men, do this because the men are much dumber than the women for sure, that not take advice because they're stubborn, but also because I think they're scared. And you take all the advice and then you apply it to what makes sense to your circumstance. And whether that was running, I had probably 15 or 20 different running peers give me advices on the training schedule or how to attack a course or what to eat before the race, right? Or the sports psychologist that you would look into, right? Everyone has their opinion. Everyone has their 2 cents, right? In the public policy space, you need to be able to speak with multiple communities, stakeholders, your peers about a political circumstance. And frankly, a policy decision where there's no right or wrong. It's just shades of gray. And winners and not winners are determined by that. It's uneasy choices with unequivocal, unencumbered outcomes that you have to be really careful about. So you're making choices because you're in a leadership role that affect real people, and you have to justify that. And that's why you need to talk to a lot of people about what they think outcomes are going to be. You need to be able to associate and own those things. You need people to remind you of that instead of being in a glass house groupthink circle. And advocacy is very much that way too. You need to be able to pitch ideas to friends, pitch ideas to others in the community, being able to differentiate how your voice is different. Also, people, I believe this, that your friends that matter are the ones that tell you when something's not good. The way I would describe the analogy is if you and I were having dinner together, Sam, and there's something in your teeth, I would tell you something.
Yeah.
Right. I want all of us to be able to embrace that. Because if you're really a good friend, you should tell them there's something in your teeth. Right. And it's not easy, but it's the truth. It should be that way. And within the last piece, I think you highlighted this in the front end about the bigger than yourself issue.
Yeah.
And I would frame it more as in the opportunity to give back and return the debt. And so for the running, I felt, regardless of what was going to happen, when you start your fitness thing, you're not thinking, oh, I'm going to qualify for the Boston Marathon. You know what I was thinking? I was thinking my godfather had died from cancer. And he had 2 regrets in his life, Sam. He said, number 1, I never asked out my high school sweetheart. So if you ever like someone, you should just ask them out, even if it's scary, which is still true advice. And the second thing was he never ran a marathon under 4 hours. And so I sat with that. His last marathon was like 4:01, right? Which is a very, very good time, right? It's very respectable. But I decided that to make the running thing work,
Yeah.
I needed to have a cause beyond me. And so for me, it was raising money for cancer. Right.
Uh-huh.
So how I put in the accountability
Yeah.
was I would raise money for cancer. Friends would contribute money. And for each person who contributed, they could pick a mile. And then I would have a little card. And if they're, let's say, Sam, you donated money at mile 20, that's your mile. And I would think about you. And it was a reminder that you were part of my pit crew, but also the reminder that you're supporting not just me, but something far bigger. Right. So you get these multiple layers of accountability. And then when you hear that small voice of doubt, you just look at the card. And then you are reminded that you're not alone. And I think, especially, in the running world, it can be a little lonely, especially if you're doing horrendous 100-mile races in the desert or somewhere. It can be very lonely. And you're kind of thinking to yourself half the time, why am I doing this? This is stupid. But then I get back to the card. That's very important to me. And in public service, the same way, right? I mean, I was doing fire disaster response in California. Every year, Sam, there's a worst fire in California history. Fire is the size of large portions of the United Kingdom, by the way. And whenever I felt the sense that the work was too hard, I would just go to these responses and you'd see the families with nothing, knowing that if you do one small thing, it could change the trajectory of their life. And, for the families I met, we would keep in touch, but also I would just have a picture on the wall. It was just a reminder. You need to have that connection because it's so easy to distance yourself, in your little ivory tower.
Yeah.
And in the advocacy space, I regularly had, people regularly sending my pieces to people, right? Complete strangers reached out, right? And I knew I had done something pretty special, at least potentially, when, again, the most apathetic people in my life were dedicating real time to things they never thought they would, but they found this calling. So it's like, can you help someone else discover what inspires them? I think that's way more powerful than just me doing stuff. I think the whole idea is the multiplier effect, right? Is other people find that sense of inspiration.
100%. No,
that's what we can do when we give back. And again, I'm a late bloomer, so there's nothing special about me. And I think that's actually really important because if someone not so special can do things of meaning, then all of us can do something, It's not like you're the world-class soccer striker, right? Or, you're not the future prime minister or anything like this. You're just a person trying to make a difference in, a very small time in one's life.
Yeah, there's so much there, what you just shared. But what I really was such a powerful framework, Jeff, for how you I love the way you create layers of accountability, whether it was looking at the context with the running, first of all, around your grandfather? Did you say your uncle?
My godfather.
Your godfather. Looking at that context of okay, he had a regret. And now, it's almost like there was a kind of opportunity to live out the regret that he had by you completing this thing, which was incomplete for him. That's kind of how it sounded. I don't know if that's how it lived for you, but
yeah, I would say it was sort of like a life relay, right? It's like there are people, that don't get to do everything, and you have the chance to help finish it. And I'll give the context of my friends in Spain, right, with the La Sagrada Familia in Barcelona. Not many people got to see it actually being finished, right? But there were a lot of people that had to work on it along the way, and understanding that hard things take time. And I would say more importantly, when you are trying to achieve something, people are also investing in your success because your success is also their success. That's a really important thing to know, which also means, by the way, the corollary is your failure is their failure. So it's in everyone's interest for you to succeed. And it's in your interest to remind yourself that it isn't just about you.
Yeah.
And my belief is that most people, when they realize that it's more than just a one-person thing, I think gives them a strength, right? I think that's the case why, when you watch a sporting event, there's a reason why the home team finds a higher degree of inspiration at home, right? at least with the caveat that the supporters are actually supporting them. Okay.
Yeah,
but
for sure.
Let's assume that. Okay. In the American context, it's always the case. Maybe in the British context, less
different scenario.
Different. Yeah, different. With rare exceptions. But it's helping someone gather the momentum, recognize the moment, and then take the leap out of the plane.
Yeah.
It's that sense of fear. Like, I think bravery is, the true sense of bravery is knowing it's really hard and still doing it. Right. I think when you think about it, I think that's, I think of, the folks on D-Day, right? World War II, you think of, what's going to happen here and you still need to do it. Like that is probably the most courageous thing I can think of. And then just everyday human being context, knowing it's really scary and still having to face it is I think that's sort of your everyday like guts, right? I think that distinguishes us as humans.
Yeah, that is where courage lies. Like to have a belief that this is incredibly scary and to do it anyway. When I joined a consulting environment, which the context of how the job was created made me feel like I was walking into some sort of Navy SEALs environment and like militaristic situation. I was like, is this for me? But I was also like, oh, there's an opportunity to make a difference, like beyond what I know in the world, with this work. Okay, now let's step into that. Let's come from that rather than the fear, because and it was certainly a case of like, well, I've been kind of headhunted for this twice. What is it about me that people are seeing that is suggesting that there's something in my leadership which has me be called to do this? And multiple people from different areas of my life are saying you should do this. Okay, let me step into their listening rather than my own. And I find that is a powerful way of getting past ourselves, is to step into the listening of others. Certainly when I'm coaching people, I think of it like I have a blank slate for them because I don't have any of their limiting beliefs. That's, I don't know what's going on in their mind. So I just get to listen from like what I hear. And then I get to reflect back like the greatness that I hear and see in them. Like I'm super inspired. Like usually when I do a podcast, I probably would interact and speak more, but I've actually just been enjoying the experience of listening to you speak and getting moved by what you've created and the context in which you have built this framework for how you have shifted through these different moments in your life. And it's almost like if you saw, like, I don't know if you already do, but it's like if you see that that's like the framework that you create for moving from clarity to courage, then any time in life where you're feeling unclear or lacking courage, you'd only just have to look at what that framework to be able to shift yourself through that next movement, the next moment.
Yeah, so I want to react to two things. First off, in terms of friends and loved ones encouraging you to do things and seeing things that you don't see. What I've learned about this is the truth is that really smart people, really talented people really suck at selling themselves. And your friends are a much better sell for that. And to your point, like the unencumbered vision, that is very much the case, right? It's sort of the way you probably hate the way your voice sounds, right? Like
actually, I'm so used to it. It doesn't bother me at all.
Okay. I would say most people, if you ask them about how their voice sounds, hate it, right? Yeah. It's sort of this just inherent thing. But probably the reality is most of these voices are pretty nice, right? And as a listener, you can hear that. One example I'll give you just sort of to make light of that. As you can imagine, I have a number of friends who, in the pandemic world are starting to do online dating again. Okay. And they always want advice on this because it was in a past life, I did a lot of helping people with their online dating profiles, right? And the one biggest piece of advice I give to everybody, regardless of what they're looking for or like what city or what app, that stuff. I mean, that's nice, but that's not what it's about. I always tell them to invite people to their home or by Zoom, have a couple drinks, have fun, and then have your friends build it for you, because your friends are going to be a much better salesperson of you. and have a better vision of what they see you are than you actually doing it yourself. Not to mention the grind of going through those apps yourself is horrible. And I tell folks to just, if it hasn't worked, why not try this? And guess what? It does work. Because especially if you have a pool of friends who are actually invested in you, right? And it's not one person, it's multiple, right? So you get an honest universe of, hey, these are the best, this is how I best describe this person, or, oh, I really like this photo, it captures their way of living life, whatever it is, right? I think that's the case in many other parts too, not just online dating, but that's why you have to have a community of people in your corner, because they have a unique life experience, circumstance, context, and frankly, connection to you to help you see the blind spots that you probably have. When you're driving your vehicle, right? Or, you're going somewhere on your bicycle, you can't see in all the angles. That's kind of just part of the deal here. Let someone else be your mirrors. And I think that's just really important. I will tell you this, the second part on capturing the moment. So some people are motivated by the positive part about it, right? And for me, most of it is the positive part. But there's also the negative part, which is wanting to prove someone or something wrong. And that needs to be acknowledged, right? And so, when I told people I was going to start running, and I had a lot of people that were very skeptical of that, and understandably so, since I hadn't exactly had a track record of fitness and health. I could barely walk up 5 stairs, I get it. But, I kept every doubt email. I kept every one of them. And I'd have a little corner for it, just to remind me that it isn't just for the positive too. It's also to overcome something else.
It's interesting.
It was, I would say for me, it was 95.5. So I'll give you an example with the mile markers, right? The card I would carry in my races. When I started running the longer races, these are 100-mile races. Usually you have about 30 hours to finish. It's usually in some godforsaken place. It's probably somewhere really far. It's not like a marathon where there's thousands of people. It's like a few hundred.
Yep.
And it's not like there's spectators everywhere. But in my mile card, if let's say, Sam, I'm doing a race and it's mile 77, and I really want to quit, or I'm feeling really bad, I'll have sent you a note in advance of the race and said, hey, if I struggle at this mile, I will call you. And then you are going to tell me as many embarrassing stories about you as possible to make the time go by. But also to sort of remind me that we can learn from folly. That's really important. And you'd be surprised how many people are ready for that call. And it's a great feeling. It's sort of like a phone a friend, if you're on some game show and you need help. It reinforces the community investment. It reinforces the feeling that you're not alone. And it also helps you focus. You're getting coaching essentially in the moment. And if anything, it's just a funny distraction. But, and this is something I wish I could change it of me, but in the race, the mile 99, every time, 99 to 100, I have a little note on the card that says all the people that told me I couldn't do it. And it's just important because you're not going to have, it's not going to be flowers all the time for you. You're going to have haters too. And whether that's in public policy or, when political actors don't see where you're going or aren't invested in you, or if it's running, when you have coaches or someone not want to work with you because they don't think you have the potential, or if it's an advocacy, if an editor doesn't think your work's any good, right? There's all these folks that they're not invested in that. And so when I do cross that finish line in 100, it's sweeter. It is sweeter. I'm not to discount the 98 other miles, right, of people that, are giving you positive energy. I just there's just something about that little black cherry on top that puts it in perspective.
Yeah. Like the first thing which comes to mind when you share that is like the athletes who are so often driven by proving others they, beyond what they thought their limitations were. And it's constantly a driving force, whether you look at like in football, Cristiano Ronaldo, Mohamed Salah, like those are two players who are clearly driven by that. The ones who are looking to be the best in the world have that mentality.
Yeah. And I would say, I guess I would say for every one of those two, I mean, there's everybody else, right? Who, I mean, they're just trying to keep their space, their place on the team, to keep their place on the pitch.
Yeah.
And I guess it's to say the reason why I lean into it is because I think, me personally, and you have to understand what are your guiding lights. But for me, if I had 99 miles of haters and the 1 mile of all the supporters, I would not be the same person.
No.
Right. Far from it. And so I think understanding when you need those certain motivations is valuable. Also, it incentivizes you, again, to have a little bit of pride. You got to have a little bit. I'm not saying it needs to overcome you, because I think pride will kill too. But I have found if I really need it, it is there. And it is something to acknowledge and channel, because when you look at movements, right, when you look at adversity, there's almost always people in your way, right? And we have to acknowledge that. And, for you to overcome those adversaries or those opponents, you do need to build a community around you, and you need to also have the grit and guts to take them on. But to acknowledge that there isn't an opponent or isn't somebody that doesn't see what you see, it needs to be said.
Yeah. So I want to finish this conversation by inviting you to look at what's present when this question is asked. So this podcast has always tried to look overarchingly at who we are really, without being attached to finding an answer to that. And I want to look for you, like when I say like, who are you really? Where do you see, if anywhere, there's some constraint upon what's possible right now in life based on that conception?
I think the hardest thing in life now, and this might be as somebody in their late 30s, with family and friend commitments, my parents are getting older. Obviously, I want to maintain a commitment to fitness. Obviously, our professional lives where we have more responsibilities. And then, as you're seeing in the United States, there's a lot of challenges, and there's a reckoning still to come on some of the racial and identity issues that we're facing in the United States, right? We have 400 years of this history. So it's something not going away. Here's my challenge. How do you do all of it? And how do you do all of it to a degree that you're satisfied? And without having to completely burn one of those things to the ground, right? So my 5 things: family, friends, fitness, day job, advocacy. How do you do all those things at a level that is proficient, and you can look yourself in the mirror and say you did the best you could and not burn out, right? How do you do that? And for me, the challenge is picking and choosing, right? There was a stretch, right, where in my advocacy, I was writing 3 to 4 pieces a week. That's not easy, especially if you're doing research and story arc or outline, first draft, second draft, third draft, editors, rejection, pitch, land, place, amplify. That's like a whole work stream.
Yep.
Right? Same thing with your running. Okay, you have a marathon. You need to put in this 12-week cycle. You need to put in all this time. Oh, I need to do an 18-mile training run. Well, that 18-mile training run is going to take away from your writing. It's going to take away from family time. You're not going to be able to see friends for drinks. That's time that you're not working. You're doing emails for a day job. How do you do that? That's, I think, the hardest thing is being okay with really good, especially if you're someone who's like deeply passionate about these things. I mean, we just walked through 3 things I really care about in my life, and that were really transformational moments. And I'm trying to keep 3 of those things with family and friends who have been, by the way, central to how these 3 things work, right? These 3 things don't work without the buy-in from family and friends. So how do you juggle that? And how do you do that in a way that doesn't create personal dissatisfaction, that you don't compare? I mean, I'm not the runner I am now, right? By any stretch. Why should I compare? Maybe I'm not the same writer I'm going to be, right? Or maybe I'm not the same policy professional. But it's important, like you are trying to meet your standard of the moment today, rather than a standard that was a completely different context for you 5 years ago, right? Think about, I mean, my God, think about the obligations you had 5 years ago versus now.
Yeah.
Think about what that world will look like for you 5 years from now. So that's the biggest challenge, I think, for people who are passionate and committed to doing things long term, is how do you do it in a way that you keep the seesaw going? Yeah. That is the big question going forward.
Well, I think the first thing would be, what I see and what you hear, what I hear and what you see. So, what I hear and what you're saying is, okay, so there's a context from which you're creating these different situations, right? So you see that 5 years ago, there was a different context. So there was different opportunities to, potentially put more time into the running, and then to be able to create an opportunity to go beyond what you were, constantly beating the times you were doing, or, set even bigger milestones for what's next. Whereas if you have a family to support and to spend time with, and you want to find a way to create all 5 things in your life, like the first thing is, one, okay, we're never going to get it all done. It's like the illusion of like, somehow I'm going to be able to do all of it, is like the way we get overwhelmed in life, because we're always trying to find a way to get it all done. And like, you're never going to get it all done. If you can really see like, oh, that's never going to happen, then okay, there's an opportunity to let go of a little bit of expectation about where you think you should be, right? So my question for you to start would be like, where do you see, like, is there any shoulds that you've created around these 5 areas which are creeping in right now?
Yeah. So I think so one of the key things, I think, to the point you raised is the expectation you cannot do all the things at the same time. So I can't be 5 people doing 5 pillars, right? Again, we're mortal, we have a finite existence. Yeah. And frankly, I think this time is a particularly hard one because it's the accelerator time for many people in your 30s, right? It's a professional development sort of surge. Yeah. It's also probably when you are expanding your family. It's probably also the time where you're really having to make decisions on who you're going to invest in your friendships. Friendships get harder. You're obviously, and then whatever your co-curricular is, those things somehow have to fit into these other growing obligations, right? And so I think the fundamental perspective I have on this is, whatever I'm working on needs to be commiserate to how I'm prioritizing it in the greater scheme, right? And so what I'm trying to do is rotate each of these items as a priority for this week or this moment. And you put in more time into that space proportionally to its value that week. Here's the hard part, is there's always curveballs, right? You could have a family member get sick, or you could have a work deadline creep up, or you could have a friend who needs to talk to you about something important, or an editor might want you to write something or speak on TV about something, right? There are things that, are opportunistic that you might have to deal with, or a curveball that you might have to face. The thing that I'm trying to, best assert is putting in more rigor and more intention, right? So that includes the night before, sort of mapping out what I hope the day will look like, and carving out an hour to outline, or carving out 45 minutes to go run, or make sure to respond to this family obligation for Christmas, right? You need to do these things. So I'm not an email zero person by any stretch, but I do have to make sure that I carve out the time. Otherwise, the time will be consumed by other externalities. So there has to be that degree of, this is my sandbox. Yeah. I'm playing in this sand now. And then if other stuff happens, I will leave that sandbox. But if you don't leave that room, all the sand just falls out. So that is on you to best figure that out. And again, everybody is different in how they manage their time. Some people are more morning people. That's when they have the creative inspiration, right? Some people need to have regular alerts and reminders. Okay. Some people, they thrive more in the, in person, or what they do is combine things, right? So I have friends who run and do meetings while they're running. I couldn't do that, but I understand why they do, right? I totally get that. So there are ways to reduce the redundancies, but here's the thing. If there's no pure equation for this, because there's so many other factors out of your control. I think the one thing you just have to do is at least have a plan. And if you get punched in the mouth, you need to make an adjustment very quickly.
Yeah. And I guess, one thing I would say here is like, how can we, in this conversation, I would say, let's focus on you, because it's really, it's people can listen for like all the different possibilities of ways of operating and dealing with this circumstance. But what matters in this conversation is really what it looks like for you. So what I would ask is, can you paint me a picture? So imagine I'm essentially like a fly on the wall.
Okay.
And I see like, you're going about your life, you're seeing and you're weak. Like, what would I see? And where would I see you being dissatisfied with the way it currently looks?
Yeah, I think you'd see me dissatisfied. I think there are two moments where you'd see me really dissatisfied. Number one is I might have multiple competing opportunities at the same time. Right. And I think that's it's not just human. It's just it's just the way it works. Right. Yeah. You go from, as I like to say, you go from Sahara Desert to rainforest very quickly in terms of opportunities, whether that's professional or otherwise. I might have, I'll give you an example from last week, right? I would have an opportunity to write about climate change issues for a notable publication. Mm-hmm. At the same time, I have a work conference I need a panel to moderate. And at the same time, there's a sick family member. So how do you decide that? While, by the way, also recovering from a 50-kilometer race, right? So like, how do you fit in those things? And there's always going to be degrees of dissatisfaction there. But I look at those four things, and I usually like to think, what's the most pressing thing in this moment? What's going to be something that matters more later? So if I do this, how much more meaning will it have down the road? And what am I okay with letting go and the consequence of that?
Yeah.
Right? And I think that's how you have to judge, and understanding that you're never going to be, you're not hitting goals from everywhere, right? It's just sort of, you have to do the best with the assumptions you make of it. Generally, I want to weigh the most unique opportunity above all first, because it's not like that comes every day.
Yeah.
That's how I would assess it. But you have to weigh that versus the very immediate obligation you have of things that maybe are not extraordinary, but are really important in the big picture of your commitments as a family member or as a friend. That's hard.
Totally. So, what I hear is like, given that you have a process for how you make the choice, are you still experiencing a dissatisfaction even after you make the choice?
So yes, yes, because we want to have our cake and eat it too.
Yeah.
I want my little cherry on my sundae, right?
Yeah.
But intellectually, when I zoom out, it's the right decision. On a human level, does it suck that I couldn't write that piece? Yeah, it does. Am I happy that I got to, take care of a family member? Yes, of course, you do that. Was I bummed I had to do this work panel? No, but it was important. All right. So, you build that stuff, and but I have wished I had more time to ice my leg. Yeah. So you sort of, I think there's like there's that the emotional part of you, and then there's that intellectual sort of big picture part. And it's hard. I mean, I think you have to regularly have that conversation within yourself. Right. So this notion that you have pure, not satisfaction, but contentment. I think contentment can be dangerous. Because again, if we're talking about personal growth, it should be about going outside comfort zones. And again, the crux of personal professional growth now is balancing the things that we've built. That is the biggest challenge, because these are important things for me, not just today, but I hope for the rest of my life. Right. So that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to build a ship for the long term, not just trying to deal with a sinking ship and then hopping onto a new boat. That's not what I'm trying to do.
Totally. No, and that's a powerful image, right? Like, it's how do you create the foundation so that you can navigate any circumstance? And the question which I've found the most profound is really around responsibility. And you've spoken a lot about opportunity, and I think this speaks to what you've shared. So, when I shifted to seeing opportunity in terms of like responsibility as an opportunity, the question becomes like, how can I be responsible for my experience of any circumstance, right? And if there's still dissatisfaction after the choice, Is it because you didn't choose it?
Yeah, that's fair. And I would say this, getting back to intentionality, you should make the choice if you can. If you're letting others make choices for you, I think that's harder. And it also builds, I think, degrees of resentment. Now, I understand there's going to be factors like if your boss wants something, that's kind of, it's hard. Or if your partner is adamant about something, like it's hard. But I think it's sort of just acknowledging that, you are also complicit to this. You are complicit to this. It is it's your free will, right? And to your point of responsibility, I also say obligation. But I'd say obligation, there is something very important about meeting that, because it also reflects on you as a person. This is something you've committed to doing, or this is why this person's important in your life. You need to prioritize it appropriately, right? Because if you this is the thing I'm concerned with, right? Is if you think everything's a priority, then nothing is a priority. So how do you sort of tier that in a way that makes sense, but also add in what we talked about, the two things, the combination of ruthless efficiency and also emotional honesty. Like you need to have that constantly juggling. And I don't think you ever get to 100 for both. I don't think that's the case as humans, especially if you're, interested in high performance in multiple areas. Like if you were defining yourself as just one thing, easy. But if you're trying to take on multiple fronts, that is way harder. And I think that's what we should try to strive for. I think we should try to strive to be the best people we can be for the best communities that matter to us. Because again, what we do ripples and affects others for the good, in my view, and also potentially the not good. So as citizens, as global citizens, we have a commitment to that. And there are micro decisions you make to allow yourself to do these bigger things, but it should be on your terms when you can.
Yeah. And I want to get back to choice here. So there's a distinction around choice, which is powerful. And I've said a little bit about it, but it's not as clear as it could be. So the thing about choosing is we tend to think of choosing as a decision. And inside of this distinction, choosing isn't a decision at all. Right? So to give you an example, you have you choose your partner because you choose your partner. Mm-hmm. You choose your children because you choose your children. So what does that mean? Okay, so I choose them the way they are and the way they aren't. Mm-hmm. And imagine then when it comes to a opportunity, and you see that what right now is, because in life there's only ever now. The illusion is there's out there and there's a future and all that stuff, but you're only living in now. Mm-hmm. So how can I be able to either say, how can I choose yes now without regret? Or how can I choose to say no now without regret?
Well, it's hard. I think, the bigger choices like picking your partner or deciding to have children, the blessing of that is it's less of a choice after, but it's an everyday affirmation. That has to happen. You need to wake up and say, I'm so, glad I made this decision. And this is something I commit to, right? Because it is on the front end, you're choosing, but you're also choosing all the things you can't control with that, right? That's part of the deal. Absolutely. That's part of the deal. 100%. So by this choice, you're also getting the not good. But in the big picture, it's hard to have regret if you think about the absence of all of that. So let's say you decide not to have a partner, or you decide not to have your children, or you decide not to dedicate yourself to fitness, whatever it is, right? Whatever your things are. If you just take a step back and you look at just the balance sheet of the reward, the sense of fulfillment, the connection, the meaning, I think it's impossible, not to see the ROI of that. But so I think you have to take that, number one, an intellectual approach and say, like, this decision has enriched my life for these ways. And that is worthy of dealing with, let's just say, the less pleasant things. And then there's the emotional part, which is a connection of self But more importantly, the witness, you have, let's just say in this case, right? You have someone that's witnessing your life. Like, how much price would you put on that, right? I think most people would put the stake of a partnership pretty high. If it's the right person, and that's a person that gets your whole self. I think that's tremendously powerful and probably does make you a better person. And I'd like to think in all the pursuits one does, if you're in the race car, that person's the voice in there, right? That person's your co-pilot with you. That person's helping you with the ship. And that your goals are not a your goals thing, it's an our goals thing. And that should help empower you to, in theory, do bigger and better. So that's how I would think of it, right? I would think like we were talking about my three things, right? In the running and the public service and the advocacy, it's family and friends that are at the cornerstone. These things don't happen without. It can't.
Totally.
It just can't. It just can't. Because not one person can do all of those things. Not humanly possible. So you have to take that strength net as incredibly valuable. But it also means there's not so pleasant things all the time, right? That's okay. There's going to be compromises you're going to make. There's going to be disappointments you're going to have to deal with. There's going to be obligations you don't want to do. But in the net of life, I think it's pretty powerful. It's a no-brainer for me. And when I look at the balance sheet of that, that's propelled me to be able to be in the position for me to talk to you about juggling 5 things, right?
Yeah.
If the family and friends things that happen, there's 0 things to juggle. So that's what I would say, right? Other people are wired differently, but that's what I would tell you. Is you just have to you got to see the landscape and understand the big picture there. And it's an investment well taken.
Yeah. And, I think the better we are at being able to say no, the more we can let go of overwhelm.
Yes.
And feeling like there's just too much to do.
Yes.
Because
no is the best word I can think of. No is important. And again, it gets back to intentionality. If you can say no to things, you should, because is it in the pillars of importance for you? Yes or no? If it's not, you should say no. That's my view. Because again, you have to be ruthless with your time. There's only 24 hours in a day, and you do have to sleep for some parts of that.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely. No, like that is, I think what I see more and more is just we create life as extremely complicated as human beings. And then we make it also hard as a consequence of how to create it. Yep. And one thing I noticed in the language across this conversation is the word hard comes up a lot for you. Yeah. And I wonder, like, how much is the default perception of life for you one which is hard?
Oh, that's well, I think for me, life is hard, but it's largely because I think 2 things. One, I wasn't forged in the world on an easy path. That's one. And 2, I have a personality, or I make decisions for whatever reason. That's usually the harder decision. It's not, I don't know if that's just how I'm wired. I don't know if that's just because of the analysis I've made a decision on, but those things are almost always true. If I'm faced with 2 decisions, I tend to make the harder decision. Not to say that harder means righter, but it's say harder just feels like the right thing. And I can put all the analytics to that. And I try to put as much value in judgment and analysis as possible. But yeah, I mean, again, if I were born into the world as I think have been identified early for leadership or talents, maybe my worldview would be different now, right? I'll give you an example. I have a very close friend of mine. We're about the same age. He was on the identified early talent track. And his challenge now is falling back to earth. Is he had a peak, at least his view, is he had a peak in his 20s and now he's plateauing. And this is the first time he's struggled with not accelerating. Yeah. And like, imagine, Sam, your entire life, you're told you're great and you're told you'll be extraordinary. And then you hit a place where you clearly are not extraordinary and you don't feel extraordinary and you're not moving extraordinarily. Yep. That must be very hard versus if you're told you're just kind of one of everybody else and you should just be happy to be here. That's a very different perception. And also it forces you to live in the moment more, because as much as I love having these moments of clarity and meaning, it could easily go away. And I think that's partly the immigrant experience, understanding you don't take any of it for granted and recognizing that, for every Sahara Desert, there is a rainforest, but for every rainforest, there's a Sahara Desert. Hey, your fortune can change very quickly. Again, through circumstances not your own, right? Yeah. So you have to take it in, and I'm not saying you should smell the flowers. You should still put in the work, but if you've spent your entire life being doubted or not being seen as anything of potential, and you still reach a place of potential, I think that's a meaningful place to be.
Yeah, absolutely. We get to create the meaning that we have in our life, because there is no inherent meaning in any of it. And that's the beauty of it all, right? So,
well, you define the meanings, right? Totally. I think that's the case, right? What is your metric for success? Right? What's your definition of value? I think, if you can set the parameters there, then that's awesome. But for you to have those answers means you haven't really thought about them. That's the hard part.
Yeah. There's that. Again, I think it's whether it's hard or not, again, is the context from which it's created, is what I can see. And there is a default way in which we all go through life and we all live. And the more what I have discovered in the work that I actually get to do on leadership looks at is like to go beyond our own conception of who we are really. What ultimately is going beyond the default mode networks that are present, which create our perception of how we're wired. Because the brain is for prediction. And if it's for prediction, then it's going to continue to follow the patterns which it knows it's comfortable to it, rather than it being our thinking, which is actually generating all of this. So when we can let go of it's us doing all of it, then there's an opportunity to let go of being right about any time, like I've created life is hard, or because of my circumstances, this is the best that I can have, or the best that I can do. Right. And I think, this conversation has created a powerful opportunity to see, like, no matter the circumstance, if you have a context or a driver or a way of seeing the situation newly, which provides something which is, in your case, bigger than yourself, you can do really quite extraordinary things as a normal human being like everyone else on the planet. So, Jeff.
Well, again, you only live once unless you're Buddhist or Hindu. The other thing I'll say, my other piece of wisdom that my mother gives me, and I want to share it here, is about experience and wisdom. Experience is learning from your mistakes. Wisdom is learning from other people's mistakes. If you can get more wisdom, that's very helpful. And I think she's very wise to suggest that. So whatever you're doing, if you have the chance to talk to others who've fallen on their face, learn from that. You don't need to understand that the floor is hard,
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Jeff, it's been a real pleasure to talk to you. Before I leave you, can you just share how people can reach out to you if they want to know more?
Yeah, sure. The best way to get a hold of me on Twitter, at Jeffrey D. Lee, and we'll put it in the show notes here. But I appreciate this fantastic conversation and the opportunity to learn from you today, Sam. And I'm looking forward to many more conversations to come here.
Me too, Jeff. Me too. Thank you for taking the time to listen. Your support really means the world to me. And without it, this podcast wouldn't exist. And if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast. And please share your biggest takeaways or what you want to hear discussed by going to thishumeanlife.com. And if you're ready to go beyond who you know yourself to be really, then go to thephilosophical coach.com. I can't wait to talk with you soon.